Hello, and welcome to part 1 of how to take better travel photos. I want to cover some basic tips for the best ways to take your vacation story by showing you photos from my own travels. So think first if you were going to write your story down on paper. You wouldn't have sentences that were all exactly 10 words long. So in the same way, you don't want all your photos to have a similar look and feel. So include some close-ups, people, mood and action shots among your sort of more standard vistas and famous landmarks. I'm going to start by talking about good composition and how to utilize foreground as a powerful tool when trying to build in context and create photos that need no captions. If you're unsure about composition, a good place to start is with the rule of thirds. It basically divides your photo up into 3 horizontal sections, which often correspond to the foreground, middle ground, and background of your shot. And then, by adding 2 vertical lines, we get 4 intersections, which are the areas where points of interest look best. So this photo is nicely divided between foreground, middle ground, and background, and we have a big rock at one of the intersection points. Similarly, here we have 2 rocks at intersection points. Now, by not placing the White House in the middle of the picture, it makes for a better composition. Now, foreground isn't always at the bottom of the picture, but it's what's closest to you and the camera. So here you can see it's at the top. And try not to center single objects of interest, unless they fill the frame, like this clock or this blossom. Now in this photo, I didn't leave enough space in front of the birds, so they seem crammed against the right-hand side of the frame. Similarly, these people just don't seem to have enough space in front of them, and that halts the motion. So this next photo here gives a better feel of them walking into wide open space. Context is also important in photos for showing relative size, and while you don't have to necessarily place a person in every picture, it's nice to have a second one that picks up an area to indicate, in this instance, how large these arches are. Now in a photo like this, you may wonder why I took a rather plain-looking canal and country view. That's because I haven't included the context, and I would have to explain to you what was happening. But in this slide, because I've included a bit of foreground, you can see, with no captioning, just how high up this lock is compared to the rest of the canal and why it was worth taking a picture. Likewise with this one, I can say it's a big lock on the Danube River. It's hard to get excited until I show you this picture where you can feel the excitement of my fellow passengers, the relative size of the lock, and the movement of the lock gate closing behind us. And sometimes it's nice to add foreground simply to make a prettier picture. Now here's a picture where the foreground actually winds through the image. And you can also use foreground to break up an expanse of water or sky or beach. Or in this instance, a rather dull-colored park area and river, without sacrificing elements of the scene that I wanted to include, like how wide the river was. This photo helps you remember and share with others what it was really like to be on a riverboat, and not just what castles you saw. Same with this one, and of course you'll have lots of other photos without the boat, but it's nice to mix these in. Now in this picture, there was so much dark foreground that the camera opened up to let more light in, and the edge of the mountain got washed away. So I stepped forward, reduced the amount of foliage, and the mountain popped into focus with the right amount of light. This is Signal Hill, popular tourist attraction in Newfoundland, but here's a shot where I found some foreground and it really enriches it. Likewise with this photo of Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. Very standard shot and nothing wrong with taking it, but look around and see if you can get a picture that most don't have or don't see. Make your photos as memorable as possible. Now here's an image you might take from a cruise ship. You can't really tell if I'm close to this ship or not because I might have zoomed. There's a lot of sky and water. I've left no room in front of the ship to move, but if I had, there would have been even more sky and water. So better to use some foreground to frame the ships, add the context of how close you are, plus adding a nice mood with the sun hitting the deck and the pop of color of the life ring. And then this lighthouse is nicely framed by a porthole that was on the promenade deck, so available to all. Now, if you want the foreground sharp, make sure your camera focuses on it by holding down halfway, the shutter halfway, then move the camera to get the composition you want. If your camera is on automatic mode, it may automatically give you a soft focus for the background. But if not, you need to set your camera dial to A for aperture and then choose a small number, say 5 or less, which results in a short depth of field. To get the background in sharp focus, many cameras in auto mode will do so automatically. If not, set the camera to dial to A, aperture priority, and again, choose a small number. Just make sure to focus on the objects at a distance. Now, if you want sharp focus from the foreground all the way to the background, set your camera to A and select a high number, say 10 or more. Now in this picture, there's a bit too much empty water in the middle of the photo, and it would have been a better picture if I'd got down lower, as I've illustrated here by photoshopping it. Or here, which is a good picture because I've got down low enough. So this is a nice enough little river, but it tells nothing of your story. By including the bow of the canoe, you get a much better sense of what I was experiencing at the same time I took the photo, and all of a sudden the river looks much more inviting to the viewer. I stood next to dozens of people from my tour bus to take this photo, but I wanted to wait for most of them to get back on the bus before I could take the shot that I really wanted, which was this one. And you can use foreground to mark the location of your site via a sign, but rather than just taking the picture of a sign, include it in a larger scene if you can. And this is another photo that needs no caption. You can even see the name of the island on the tote bag. And certainly if you have a room with a view, step back and get the window frame, and that shows you how close you were to that spectacular view. Now this first image gives you an idea of what was happening with this potter, but the second image gives you a fuller story. And by all means try and get a bit of humor and add it to your tale, but look for the best shot. So this is kind of cute, but this one's even funnier. So moving on to capturing motion. When you're capturing fast motion, get in close or zoom, but then crop later for even greater impact. And in this picture, even though the boat was moving fairly quickly, it doesn't appear to be. This second photo taken a few seconds later shows much more movement, and you get the sense of perhaps some competition between the boats. It's a much more dynamic photo than the first. This is a colorful photo of the Panama Canal, nothing wrong with it, but if you want to show what it felt like to lock down, this image does a better job. You wouldn't hang it on your wall, but it makes a nice travel photo and mixed in with others that might be a little more artistic. So capturing architecture, obviously lots of great buildings when you travel. A good rule of thumb is to shoot from the corners and look for color. And if there is no color, add something into the foreground that could add a little bit of pop. Don't worry about including right to the top of a steeple. Our brains tend to fill that in, and you'll have much less empty space in your photo. And the best time to shoot buildings is early in the morning or in the late afternoon, so that way the features you are trying to record are properly lit. And as I mentioned earlier, it's nice to have an assortment of photos, different types to grab attention of the viewer, so look for some close-ups. These details will really enrich your story. And do a quick check of light and background, and if you don't like what you took, try taking it from another angle, like this. And this is a great detail shot. You can tell almost the whole story just by the one picture itself. So please watch my part 2 video where I will cover more about light, how to incorporate people into your pictures, and how to take better beach scenes and sunsets. Thanks!